Hello, in episode 9 of Sales Enabled, I'm speaking with Leigh Ashton from the Sales Consultancy. Leigh is a speaker, trainer, and coach, and the author of 2 books, iSell, Unlock Your Winning Sales Mindset, and Grow Your People, Grow Your Sales. Leigh works with sales leaders and their teams to develop sales growth mindset and healthy sales growth cultures that support personal development, mental well-being, and sales success. In this conversation, Leigh and I really get to talk about the mindset of sales success and how all sales leaders really need to get a better understanding of psychology if they're going to get the most out of their teams. Leigh is also a really interesting take on performance culture versus growth culture, and why we might be looking at some of the wrong metrics if we really want to be building strong, sustainable sales teams. Towards the end, we get into what some might consider fluffy territory and start to discuss how mission, purpose, and spirituality impact sales performance. However, Leigh's perspective on how to turn spirituality into a powerful sales tool is definitely one to stay tuned for. Let's jump into the show. Leigh, good morning. Great to see you again. Great to have you on the show.
I'm so happy to see you, and it's great to be in conversation with you again, Dan. You know, we always have such interesting conversations.
It's hilarious.
Not always about sales.
Well, while we were setting this up, right, we looked back at emails. We first met each other we knew each other before. We followed each other on LinkedIn, and then we finally met in a WeWork about 5 years ago, something crazy.
Oh, wow.
So it's good how eventually paths cross and then they crisscross and they kind of do that thing. So yeah, really good to have you back and pick your brains. I've got your book, literally. I've got this. It's been with me, the iSell book. So we'll talk a little bit about that because I think that's how we first connected, right? On the mindset, the kind of psychology behind selling was one of our biggest connection points. So looking forward to doing that. But one thing that I want to pick your brains on first is 4-day weeks. Now, I know they've obviously been in the news, but you've just managed to figure this out for yourself. So how's that going? Why did you push yourself to do a 4-day week? What have you learned? Is it good? Did you recommend it?
I absolutely do recommend it. It was a very flippant comment in the team meeting in December before Christmas. And something came up about 4-day week, and I said, do you know what? I'm going to do that next year. So after the Christmas break, I have been working Monday to Thursday, and I don't call my Friday a day off. I call it my personal choice day. And that personal choice day can be anything. So if something that was really important about work came up, I would absolutely do it because, you know, my work is my joy.
Yeah.
But I tend not to, or I haven't so far. So I might visit my mum or go shopping. It definitely includes going to the gym, which I know you and I are both in that camp, in the gym. And, or it might be reading a book or just doing some chores around the house. So I have found that as a result of 4-day week, I'm calmer, more relaxed. I get more done on the 4 days.
Wow.
And something extraordinary has happened to the weekend because it's like, I start my weekend on the Friday now. So, you know how everyone on Saturday's doing all their chores?
Yeah.
I've already done them. So I find myself with these banks of time.
Amazing.
Where I go, oh, shall I just watch Saturday Morning Kitchen?
We all need ideas on cooking. So... But that's brilliant.
Because I love a cooking show, actually, and I never, ever have time to watch anything like that as a rule.
Yeah.
But this year has been extraordinary. I'm sleeping better. I never expected the impact. And over Christmas, I was out with some friends and said, I'm only doing 4 days a week next year. And a woman who I didn't know but was in the group at this thing said, it's life-changing. And I thought, okay.
Yeah.
But it really is.
It sounds like it's really, really made the difference.
But that's
It
brilliant. I mean,
really has.
I know what it's like. You get those 3-day weekends occasionally, and you feel just by the end of that weekend, you feel just so much more relaxed than 2 days. Like you say, Saturday seems to be a rush to get everything done that's built up throughout the week. So you've already got that done on a Friday, and you can just chill out, take an easy start. How have you
And
found?
the thing
What have
is,
you had to do though? What have you had to do? Come on, squeeze everything into 4 days. Are you prioritizing differently? How are you changing it?
I just squeeze everything into 4 days. But I'm getting more done in that day. It's almost like, because my batteries are fully charged, I can get more done. And when I worked 5 days, sometimes that would spill over into Saturday, because I think, oh, I didn't get time to do that. I'll do that Saturday morning.
Yeah.
And what I found is there is no Friday or Saturday morning anymore. I'm going to get it done Monday to Thursday.
Yeah.
And that's a not, that's a deal breaker. So if I can't get it done in Monday to Thursday, then it goes into the following week. Now, there have been 2 occasions where I've got an email on the Friday where I wasn't working to ask for a proposal.
Yeah.
And I knew that the following week was really busy. So I did do that on a Sunday morning. But it was choice, and it's great. Who doesn't want to do a proposal? But in the main, what I found, Dan, is you talked about when you have a 3-day weekend, it's really great. When that's every week, there's some magic that happens.
I bet.
But like the first time you do it, or if it's a one-off, you feel like, oh, at least I've had a bit of a weekend. But when it happens every week, your body relaxes, your mind relaxes.
And we'll talk about mind relaxing, because I know one of the things you want to talk about today is stress and how that impacts people's performance. Quickly before we go, because I'm sure people are listening to this thinking, actually, you've sold me on the idea. If people want to do it, what would be some of the caveats? What would be some warnings or some things you've learned so far about how to set this up right?
Well, I use a bullet journal as my methodology of planning. So it's very easy. If you don't know bullet journal, it's not a journal that you buy that's got all these little fields. It is a methodology that you use in a notebook.
Okay.
So if you go to bulletjournal.com or go to YouTube and look up a bullet journal, then you can find out more about that. So I would say I plan my week as I always have done since I've been bullet journaling, but it's only Monday to Thursday, and I still have Friday and the weekend in my bullet journal, but I put what I'm going to do for me.
Yeah.
So that I get all my personal stuff done as well. So I would say make sure that you plan Monday to Thursday. I think you'll get more efficient, so you'll get more done Monday to Thursday, but be wary not to overstretch. Like, don't be working till 10 o'clock Monday to Thursday, or that's just ridiculously, like, it's just no point in doing that. It's like, do you have to do this? Like, I know you can do it, but should you be doing it? And I think, well, we'll talk more about it in the podcast, but I think people hold on to things that they think they should do way past the sell-by date, actually. So it's like, the world is changing rapidly and we have to change with it. So things that used to work no longer work, and it's easy to keep a hold of them because they're familiar. And you think, well, they used to work, so I'll just do more of it because maybe it's not working as it should. I think that because the world is changing so quickly, things just don't work for as long as they did back in our day when we first got into sales. You could do the same things over and over again and know that the predictability ratio was, 2 out of 4 would say yes.
Yeah. And you could plan accordingly, right? So, no, I love it. I was having a conversation yesterday, and someone was saying, "Oh, it's the strongest of the species that survives." And I said, that quote isn't correct, right? And it's like, what do you mean? It's not the strongest, it's not the fittest, it's the one that's most adaptable to change. So, I think that's a good thing. So, prioritize what you need to do, let go of the stuff that maybe you used to do that doesn't serve you anymore, and then just find a way to enjoy the 3 days. Beautiful, Leigh. I'm gonna see if I can get that set up as well. That's phenomenal. Let's move on to sales then. So your job, your I think you call it more of a mission or purpose is sales and training salespeople. Give us a quick rundown. How did you get into this? How did you figure out that this was what you wanted to do with your life?
Wow, I fell into sales by accident, as most people do. Or certainly back in the day, it wasn't something you thought, oh, I'm going to be a salesperson.
Right.
So someone suggested it to me because they knew me and said, I think you'd be really good at sales. And I went, oh, no, that's definitely not me. But I couldn't get the thought out of my head. So a week later, I said to them, I'm going to go for an interview for a sales job. And if I get the job, I know that that's my path. I'm a great believer in things like that.
Yeah.
And guess what? My first interview, I got the job. And they didn't just give me the job that I applied for. He said, I'm going to give you a better job.
Wow. That's some interview skills. Maybe we should do a separate podcast just on that topic.
Well, to be honest, I'd never been for an interview that I didn't get the job.
Yeah.
So I kind of went in there a little bit. Let's be honest, I was in my early 20s, so I hadn't had that many interviews, and I was quite bubbly. Yeah. And so I got into this sales job, and I was really fortunate to be successful because I love people. And even when I didn't know what I was doing, I knew I could just chat with them. So I was just chatting with them, not realizing how important it was to get into rapport, and that being a significant factor. It wasn't till much later that I learned about psychology. So I was really successful, and less than 3 years as a salesperson, I was promoted to sales manager. And that's when, for the first time in my life, I felt like a failure because I realised, oh my God, this is a whole different ball game here. It's not just me responsible for my results. I'm responsible for supporting these people to have results. And I can't get these people to do things that are really good. Why aren't they doing these things? So I found that they fell into 3 camps. The first camp was, I'm going to try that, Leigh.
Yeah.
And off they would go and try it. The second camp was, I'm going to try that, Leigh. And off they would go and carry on doing what they were doing before.
Yeah.
And the third camp was, that won't work for me or my territory.
Yeah.
And so I got really curious to what would cause a human being not to do something that would exponentially increase their sales, having witnessed me doing it. So they knew that I had done it.
Yeah.
They knew that's what I did. Why wouldn't they do that? And that is what led me into psychology. So I got all these books, these programs, because this was before the internet, there was no going on YouTube to watch videos.
So you got all the cassettes, the course on cassette. Oh, amazing.
Yeah, Nightingale, Conan, for those of you that are old enough will remember, they were all these self-help programs on cassette. And within a very short space of time, these books, people like Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy and Jim Rohn and all these people who were mindset, really focused on mindset, I thought, oh, that's it. Even if I share with them what to do, if their mind isn't in the right place, they're not going to do it.
Right.
And so that was the start of my journey. So for the rest of my sales leadership career in the corporate world, I focused on getting people to think differently. And when you got them to think differently, they would make the changes. But there was still lots more to learn because back then I didn't understand about the depth of like limiting beliefs and like negative being in the valley of reasons and excuses, as I call it, and also how people's wounds from past experiences created a lot of fear that caused them not to do things, even when they want to. They're afraid of consequences. And in later years, obviously, and you and I have talked about this, sometimes the cultures of organisations are sometimes very toxic or sometimes unknowingly toxic because they say there's no room for failure. And they think that, I call that toxic positivity. It's like, come on, we can do this. Come on, we can do this.
Yeah.
And it's also quite cruel because I done it, so you can do it. Well, no, this isn't a level playing field here. You haven't had their life. You might be able to do that, but they might not be, depending on what's happened in their life, what adults they grew up with in terms of caretakers or teachers, what they've said to them. And so I think that organisations are still doing that, but some of them unknowing and some of them just don't care.
Yeah. This is part of my journey, like the education piece. So my training, I started teaching neurolinguistic programming. This is way back in the day. My first ever training, sales training, was like a 2-week NLP training. Got to the end of it and I found out people don't want to learn NLP. I was like, oh, okay. Could have told me this is the beginning of the week. But then over the years, you figure out how to deliver that subliminally, right? And unconsciously, you put it in the words of sales, but you're teaching them these techniques. That's what, your first book, the iSell book, I think you did that really well. Is and I did that with my NLP book, the Next Level Persuasion, is you can be a bit more explicit then. You say, hey, here's what I'm teaching you, and here's what I'm teaching you really, and here's why I'm teaching it to you. And there's a model that I always share when people ask why, like, why is it important to do the psychology side of things is, we'll come back to exercise in a minute, but there's a model by Robert Dilts, the neurological levels model. And that explains everything. I talk about it from an advanced rapport thing, but most trainings, they look at, want to change your results. So let's give them some new skills. Let's do that. Let's give them some skills. And if we give them skills, they'll do the behavior. And then if they do the behavior, they get the results, right? Easy. And that's training 101. So you walk into these training rooms, it's like, here's the 3-step process to do this. And then, like you say, people walk out and go, nah, not for me. It's like, what? Yeah. This works. Why doesn't it work? But you've got to go above that line. You've got to go into values and beliefs and start understanding how people are wired. And then ultimately, if you can get to identity, is if you can shift the way they see themselves, that's where you get that kind of the waterfall, magic, right? The cascade. It's hard to do, though. You can't do it explicitly. What you're going to do, go into a sales training and say, hey, everybody, close your eyes and picture an island. It's like, I've tried that. It's you got to have a lot of trust. And that was a long time ago. But that's where we want to take people, right? We want to get people to envision themselves differently as salespeople. And, the classic example, and you said about going to the gym on your personal choice day. And I keep trying to go to the gym, keep working on this bodybuilding journey that I'm on. But I'm the same. I have the same skills and behavior, or same skills and knowledge that I did now as before I started on this journey. But there's a mindset application piece that's allowed me to actually use that. So, the iSell book, that was about mindset, right? That was about mindset. But you mentioned culture. You mentioned how we want to set an environment for salespeople to be successful and do the things without fear, right? That they know they need to do. You haven't got your manager looking over the back with a clipboard, and we've all been there. And your second book, which was the Grow Your People, Grow Your Sales, you got it there, haven't you? You figured it out. There you go. So that's obviously talking more about the people and the culture side. So, evolving from mindset to culture, what have been some of the things that you've noticed, or what are some of the things that you teach that make kind of culture come a little bit more to the top of the list?
Well, what's really interesting is when I work with sales leaders, because, you can teach salespeople mindset skills, but if their sales leader is a bit of isn't acclimed to that way of thinking, they will squash the mindset of these individuals. So when I go into an organisation, I won't do training just for salespeople. If the leaders are not included, I say you're wasting your money. You're wasting your money with whoever you work with.
Exactly.
So it's got to start with the leaders, because even in a toxic organisation, the leader can create what I call an island of sanity within the chaos of the organisation that keeps the salespeople safe and thriving and growing.
Yeah.
So the culture, you talk about safety, and psychological safety is a recognised term now, where people feel that their leader has their back. If they make a mistake, everyone can learn from that. A mistake isn't a bad thing. A mistake is how we grow. It's a part of it. And so when I'm working with sales leaders, they often think that leadership is about being the boss. And not because sometimes it's ego and ego is involved, but it's often because that was the way they were led by the boss.
Exactly.
And the boss told you what you had to do and you did it. And I'll give you an example of how a leader on a program shared how she had changed. And this was literally half a day over a 6-month period. So half a day each month for 6 months. So we're not talking about in-depth training here, but over a period of time. And she said that before the program, if someone had been late 3 times, she would have said to them, "You've been late 3 times, sort it out." In the beginning. And now she says to them, "You've been late 3 times. Is everything okay?" Interesting.
I think I would have done the same thing. Like historically, I'd be like, because lateness, we ascribe meaning to it, right?
I know.
How did she make that? What was the difference? What made her?
Because in the program, what I share with leaders, and all leaders, whether they're egotistic, like egocentric, and it's all about them, or not, they are all looking for that missing key that will turn the lock to make their team more successful. So as long as you say, put yourself in their shoes, if you tell your people what to do, you're teaching them to do what you tell them. If you say, "What do you think you should do?" you're teaching them how to think so that they can do it themselves in the future. So when you start sharing stuff with them and then they go and try it and come back, that really works. So you kind of start them off with little simple things like stop telling. And when they come and ask you, you say, "Oh, well, I've got some ideas. What do you think?" And if they're there or thereabouts, just let them get on with it. And that you have to let them stuff their needs. And each time there's a session, we go a bit more deeply into the heart and soul of human beings and how the job of a leader is not to lead. It's actually, this is my definition. The job of the leader is to develop that human being to the next stage. So if they're right at the beginning, you're getting them to the next chapter. If they're already up here, you're still just getting them to the next chapter. So everyone's a winner because they're all incrementally moving. So I call that a learning culture or a growth culture. Unlike a high performance culture, you're either at the top, you're a winner, and if you're not at the top, you're a loser. Well, a growth culture is all about every person being a winner who is making progress. And so when you share that with leaders, they go, "God, that makes so much sense." They actually do want to do it. And it's more relaxing for them. They feel more relaxed. They feel like when you are doing kind of leadership, you get more oxytocin and serotonin in your body, so you feel good, your team feel good, everyone feels good. Guess what? the sales go up. It's not rocket science.
It's a little bit crazy. And I know, we obviously surround ourselves with this all the time. We've studied it. We know the impact. We know how good this thing is. But I think, as you said, there's this domino effect. So my sales leader did it and their sales leader did it. And so there's this kind of cascade of, we should do it all the way. But you talked in there about, this kind of high performance culture. And I think you can have both. You can have one with high performance and you've got two in sales. But it's this idea that, it's do more, do more, do more. It's not. And, Tim Galway, he wrote the Inner Game books, right? The Inner Game. Yeah. He talks about performance is potential minus interference. And, training often, people have this, if we want to make them better, let's just make them more, give them more potential and train them and make them better. But, that question is, are you okay? Like, is everything all right? Creating that environment of psychological safety, actually, you'll be able to identify some of those things that are holding people back, whether it's physical restrictions, societal restrictions, just mindset things. It could be anything that's going on, right? And, actually taking a moment for, leaders, taking a moment to get into the hearts and minds. And we're going to go fluffy. So we'll talk about fluffy in a minute. I love the word fluffy. Loads everything. But it is that, right? It's that the switch from me as a sales leader driving activity to me as a sales leader unleashing the potential of my team. Like that's it. And driving potential and driving growth rather than driving calls and activities. And like you said, as a leader, that's going to be far more enjoyable for me.
It is. And, often when I'm working with leaders, some of them think that they coach, and they think that they coach because they talk about KPIs and say, this is your KPIs. How are you going to get this up or down or what, or whatever the optimum direction is. And I go, that's really performance review.
Yeah.
Coaching the human being is where the magic happens. So if someone's not doing something, you don't say, well, you're not doing enough proposals, or you're not doing enough calls, or you're not doing enough follow-up, or you're not putting stuff in the CRM, or it's not the same as, I've noticed these behaviours. What stops you doing it?
Yeah.
What stops you?
Yeah. Not what makes you better. How could we make you better? Like, what's getting in the way?
And sometimes the person themselves doesn't even know. And it's very common when you coach your team, and for each person in your team, you'll need a different approach because they're all unique. It's like, I always say, always have packets of tissues. I carry them everywhere, and make sure there's water in the room. I mean, obviously, if you're on Zoom, that's a bit more challenging, but at least the person is in their home. But if you're in a room with them, make sure you've got tissues and water, because when you start asking people about stuff and they feel safe, it is very common, as you have probably experienced, Dan, for tears, male and female. I've had men in tears in a room because for the first time, somebody actually wants to listen to what is going on for them. Yeah.
And sales is one of those ones. I don't know, there's probably other industries and there's other roles, that have the emotional ups and downs that sales do. But sales experiences it every single month. Right? And now it's even more so, right? It's like, geez, I've got to look over shoulders and everyone's experiencing fear. And there is this, like you say, the false positivity. Like, everything's good, and just drink a little bit more coffee. I remember one of the sales teams that I worked with and trained, we had a fridge of Red Bull in the corner of the office. I'm not gonna lie. I was at the front of the queue every day. I'm like, but it's that kind of thing, right? It's like, let's go, and let's not look at the craziness or the toxicity or scratch beneath the surface. So I think that's it. So how do we break that cycle then? Obviously, you're coaching people, you're training sales leaders. What else can we do to break this cycle of, just push harder to creating psychological safety? But then how do we overlap that with performance? What's your take on that?
Well, I think that all of the personal coaching is about increasing performance. So it's like what stops you, and then addressing those barriers so that the person is more likely to do the behavior, the activity that is going to increase their performance. And I would say I cannot think of any situation where coaching has sent the person in the wrong direction. You know, personal coaching always increases performance. And I've been in the game since the 80s. So, you know, it's a long time. And I did my coaching training in the late 90s. So coaching's been around a really long time in lots of arenas, but less so in the corporate world of sales. It's, you know, it's only been in the last decade really that it's reared its head. But you see it in sports and stuff all the time. It's been there for a long time. So it's about, for me, coaching is the first step, because that also develops a relationship between the individual and their leader. And so you get trust, and the leader also is really engaged in the development of that person as a human being. So firstly, coaching. The second is developing a growth mindset, because our elements of growth mindset are things like attitude to feedback, attitude to failure. So the leader has to make sure that failing is okay. Like, you know, if someone keeps repeating with the same failure, then that's not okay. That's a coaching conversation. But failure is part of growth. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Because you're just playing safe. So making it okay to fail and then have a conversation about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing is, you know, as a leader, being humble enough to grow with your team. So not thinking that you have to have all the answers. You know, when people ask me a question when I'm delivering a session and I've never thought of it before, I find that thrilling. I go, wow, that's such a great question. No one's ever asked me that. And it's not, you know, I've never considered it. I could give you my immediate response, but I'd really like to think about it for 24 hours, because I think I'd have a different response if I thought about it. So I give them my immediate response based on my experience to this point. And then I go back the next day, I went, I've been thinking. So this is what I said, and this is what I would change in what I said. So I find that really exciting. So whenever I've gone on a workshop and people say, what do you want to get out of the workshop? I want to learn something about myself that I don't currently know. That is always my outcome. So I talk about humans having a mind that most of it's in darkness. So think of it as like a warehouse. The bits of the mind or the warehouse that they go to commonly, the lights are always on because they're always using those bits. The job of the leader is to ask a question in that sends the person into that area of darkness. They can just see a flickering of a light and go, oh, what's that over there? And then they go over to that area and go, oh, I never thought about it. We're doing that already with our clients. We love, like if we're talking to a prospect, when you ask a question, you go, oh, that's a really good question. You go, yes.
Right.
And leaders should be doing that with everyone in their team.
Okay. So sales leaders should run discovery, psychological discovery with their teams. That's brilliant. Now, I love the feedback and failure one. I'm listening. Do you use Audible? I'm a massive fan of audiobooks.
Oh,
hence, obviously, the podcast format. But No Rules is a story about the Netflix culture. And they have a really, like, externally, it could look ruthless, like high turnover, like if you don't cut it, you're out. But they have a massive open feedback culture. So anyone within the org can give feedback to anyone within the org. But there's 3 rules. There's 3 rules, if I remember it rightly. I haven't finished the book yet, so maybe there's more. But the first one is delivered with positive intent.
By the woman.
I think it's Reed Hastings and Marissa Meyer. Yeah, so Marissa Meyer, who wrote The Culture Code, I think she went and consulted with Netflix. And actually gives a story about that in a moment. So I'll kind of relay that. But yeah, so the first point is positive intent. So you're always trying to help improve the situation with the feedback. You're not being like a pain in the butt, and you're not just trying to say it to derail a conversation. Oh, Leigh, why haven't you thought of it like this, or something along those lines? And we know those people. It's like, thank you very much for your comment. Moving on. So it has to have positive intent. Second one is it has to be actionable. So it has to be something that you can do as a result of the feedback. And then the third piece is you can choose whether to take on the feedback or not. You got to hear it, you got to appreciate it, you got to respect it. Whether you act on it or not is entirely up to you, if it makes sense to improve. And the example, Marissa Meyer, so she's giving a presentation to this multinational thing. She's the author of Culture Code, so she's supposed to be this kind of worldly person. And she asks for questions, so people put their hands up, and then she picks the people who respond. And then she goes into the audience into breakout rooms, and a woman comes up to her and says, hey, just so you know, the way you're engaging with people, you're only engaging with the Americans, because all the Asian people won't put their hands up. Like, so you're not getting a true representation of the audience. She's like, holy wow. Somebody called her on her own stuff. It's like, that's amazing, right? To have the permission to say that, and to say it in such a constructive way. And all the surveys on feedback says people prefer direct, constructive feedback as opposed to fluffy, light stuff. So I love that, and how you bring in feedback and into a coaching situation. I think that's huge, and just setting people up for failure. The failure thing is really interesting, right? If you're closing 100%, like you said, you're not trying hard enough. You got to go out and find a few losses, and leaders, breaking that down and really analyzing what it was. If we went 100% and we did our best, like, where can we improve next time? And having it as like a post-mortem almost.
Yeah, it's all about marginal gains. And the best book I've ever read on marginal gains is Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed.
Yeah.
That is just phenomenal. But there is one thing that is definitely required for high performance that a lot of leaders don't like to do. And there is resistance to doing it. And that is tough love conversations. So I call them tough love. Most leaders go difficult conversations. And I go, yeah, but, I call it tough love as you would if you have a child and they're doing something really naughty. You have to sit them down and go, no, that's not good. And then that you have to get them to understand, because you don't want your child to grow up to be an idiot.
Yeah, exactly. I'm having a lot of those conversations these days.
Yeah, of course. But, leaders often think, well, if I ignore it, they will work it out on their own. Or they give these cryptic comments that people have to read between the lines. And the reason they do that is because they are afraid that person's going to get upset or start crying, and they are uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
That leaders have to be comfortable with tears. They have to be, or they can't be a leader.
Yeah.
So a tough love conversation is absolutely necessary, and people think it's kinder not to have them, and I say it's cruel to not have them. How is it kind to let that person keep making that mistake and doing that thing over and over again without giving them the opportunity to change? It is really cruel not to have that conversation. They go, oh, I never thought of it like that.
Yeah.
And so think of it as like you sparked the thought of it in terms of like having positive intent. If they were your child, what would they need to know in order to evolve as a human being?
Yep.
That is, it's like Simon Sinek says, every person in your team is someone's son or daughter that they have given to you for the next stage of their development. I mean, that's a massive responsibility.
Yeah. And that one of my things as a trainer, and anybody that I'm teaching to be a trainer, is, hey, this is the first time you're on stage. You are representing the industry, you're representing the company, you're representing everyone. Like, you got to come with your A game every single time. You don't get to have a bad day as a trainer. I mean, you can. This kind of ignores all of the stuff that we just talked about from a psychological safety. But actually, as a trainer, you're on stage as a performance piece. Like, get ready, get into the zone, use some of the mindset techniques. But I think that's important, right? Because we are responsible for people's growth, and we have the ability to shift careers with the work that we do. And I think we should take that extremely seriously.
Also, Dan, the other thing is that because we're focusing on mindset, you're not just impacting them at work. Because if you shift the way that somebody thinks in work, guess what? That shifts in the rest of their life.
Right.
So, their health, their fitness, their finances, their relationships, all of those things, it has an impact on everything.
Leigh, it's hilarious. And the reason I'm smiling and laughing to myself is I was listening to this book, the one on feedback, the Netflix culture one. And I'm listening to it. I think that'd be great. That would be great for me to do at work. Let's do feedback. Let's put feedback on the agenda. And then I came into the house and did a project. I'm not very good at DIY, and I made a mess in the bathroom. And my wife said, couldn't you just tidied up or thought about this and not made a mess? I went off in a mood. I went downstairs that's messy. Then I was like, wait, what have you just been listening to? I went back and I was like, thank you for the feedback on all this. I appreciate it. Yes, next time I will do better. But it is multi-contextual. Yeah. So I do love that. And you probably do the same thing, right? You teach it in a business context and say, hey, what about if you apply these ideas in the real world or in life or with other relationships and stuff?
I do teach it in a business context, but right at the very beginning, I say, this isn't just for your desk at your office or this is, you can use it everywhere. And actually, I encourage you to use it everywhere you can. So if you go to the gym, use it in the gym. If you have kids, use it with your kids. If you have challenges internally, use it on your own personal stuff. If you've got challenging relationships in your family or friend circle, use it there. It's honestly, the more they use it, the more they'll use it at work.
Definitely. And you get good at it, right? The more you use it, the better you get at it. No, I think that's huge. So we've moved from mindset and kind of figuring out how people tick and trying to get them to do the things and get their excuses out of the way. We've looked at culture and leaders are responsible for driving the culture. I just did an amazing podcast with a good friend of mine, Robert, on this. And it's a huge topic right now of culture, balancing performance with safety and psychological safety. We talked fluffy. We talked about mind, body, spirit. We talked about heart and soul. I know you're doing some work on sales and spirituality. Why don't you give us, because that can sound super fluffy, but I know you're going to be delivering it in business. So what does spirituality mean to you? How do you see that, and where does it come into sales?
Well, I think that all human beings have a spirit. It's and in martial arts, not that I've ever done martial arts, but I know they say, lift your spirit out of the gutter, because someone who does martial arts told me that. And we all have a spirit. And when our spirit is high, we feel really good. And when our spirit is low, we don't. And so I think of spirituality as being connected to the deepest part of you or your higher self, and if it's if you are religious, it might be to God, but it doesn't have to be. It could be to your driving purpose or your big purpose in life. And so I think of spirituality as that, being connected to something bigger than just you or a bigger version of yourself. And so I think that we can do that for ourselves, but I think sales leaders need to be warriors of the human spirit. So there are things that I have, like spiritual values, that have actually governed my entire sales career. And I write about it in Grow Your People, Grow Your Sales, in terms of, when I first started, as a human being, I am quite kind. People often say how kind I am. And someone actually they're using my book in a sales coaching qualification. And the person said, we love your book because it's written from someone who understands sales leadership, who's been there and done that and got the t-shirt, but also in a really kind way. You're not making anyone feel like an idiot if they haven't done it. So things like kindness and wanting to help somebody have all, and allowing unfolding and having faith. If someone, when leaders tell their salespeople to get a deal over the line, and if you're a salesperson, you know that customer isn't ready to get, they're a step. Like, how do you feel going to that person and say, look, is there any chance we can, and knowing that you've already acknowledged that it's not going to happen for another month. Yeah. I mean, it feels so wrong in the body, and that's your spirit saying no.
Yeah. So you think the more of a holistic approach, as opposed to just a mercenary approach. Is it that? So it's selling in a way that agrees with you as a person. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like there's this mantra that I use. Is it good for me? Is it good for others? And is it good for the planet? So if you have that wider perspective, then you're a spiritual person because you care about humanity. So you don't need to believe in God to be spiritual.
Right.
You just have to believe in being a good human being.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Spirituality, if you look at it, everyone's got the same rules. Like, it doesn't matter what label or badge you put on it at the top. Everyone's like, don't do any evil things, don't do bad things, try and treat each other as you would want to be treated. Those kind of things. Leave the planet in a better state than you kind of joined. And I think here's the thing that, and me and you, we go back. There's some fluffy stuff in the history, is finding something that aligns with, like you say, whether it's your purpose, your mission, whatever it is, finding something that you believe in, that makes a difference, that you can sell in a way or communicate in a way that you agree with. And this is the thing, and I've taken salespeople, and I've seen salespeople move, and this again kind of comes back to culture, comes back to fit. Is you can take a salesperson from one organization to another and see massively different performance in those individuals, and sometimes it's the product, they just don't believe in it. Sometimes it's the culture, they just don't feel supported. Sometimes it's the sales approach. Sometimes it's, they sell in a different way. They're more relational, more tangible, like whatever it is. And so actually, there's a way of balancing that. And I like the way we talk about it. So it's something inside. Listeners, we haven't got long enough to go into spirituality now, but figure that out. Is does what you're looking for inside match what you're doing outside?
Yeah. Does it feel good in your body? Your body never lies, actually. Your mind can deceive you, but your body never lies. If something doesn't feel good, it simply does not feel good.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Leigh, this conversation has felt good. This conversation has felt like, we could go on forever. There's so many angles that we could just run off in. So thank you so much. Like, it's been brilliant. You've brought a smile to my face. You've kind of unleashed some ideas. So something must have happened in spirit, right? So that's the energy. There's something in there. So
you're definitely a warrior of the human spirit, Dan. That's for sure.
Beautiful. And if we go back to kids, I should have a sticker for that. So there we go. Leigh, people are going to be inspired by the ideas that you've shared today. They're going to want to know more. Obviously, the books are on Amazon, but how can people find out more about you and the work you do?
I would say you can either go on to my website, which is sales-consultancy.com, sales-consultancy.com. If you want to be involved in my latest thinking, LinkedIn, I post at least 3 times a week on my thoughts. I kind of the day before think, what am I thinking about today? And then I just write a post. And today, funnily enough, is a 4-day week. So if you're watching the recording, that might not be today, but today, as of today, is a 4-day week. So I would say LinkedIn. You'll find me. My handle on LinkedIn is Leigh Ashton 1. The great thing about being a bit older is that you got there first. So on LinkedIn,
I think I'm Dan Story 14. There's a few other Dan Stories. I'm not top of the pile, apparently.
Yeah, but you are younger than me. I was there when all these platforms landed. So anyway, you'll find me on LinkedIn, and there you can read my profile and my thoughts as a human being.
Amazing. Well, definitely get hold of the book. The iSell one is phenomenal. I'm looking forward to getting the second one as well, Leigh. I'll read that at some point. Beautiful. Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks for joining us. I'll see you soon.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Dan.
You know what I think, Ron? I think that was a sales call. Good job, buddy.
So you're going to buy a subscription?
No, I already get the Times.
Bye-bye.